Let's talk about biracials in the black community. Let's start with the Signares. The Signares were a wealthy, influential class of black and mixed race women in French colonial Senegal, primarily St. Louis and Gorée Island during the 18th and 19th century. Derived from the Portuguese word for lady, Signares basically were a bunch of Senegalese women selected by European men, Frenchmen, who they mated only with white men. A lot of the children that came from that marriages, the children that came from those marriages had no power. They didn't give men any power. The girls that came from those marriages were the ruling class. They did the same shit in Haiti. The white people left Haiti, they left the biracials in charge. When the Haitian biracials, when the Haitian revolution happened, it was biracial people Haitians fought. It wasn't white people. It was biracials keeping the system. In Senegal, we had the Signares. If you notice, it's almost always women that colonial people use to destroy a society. So when you try to explain to the black woman that what you think about, what you're doing today, I promise you, sister, it's not your mindset. Somebody put it in, they don't want to listen. But anyways, we talk about the Signares, right? Next, we have the Nharas. The Nharas were from Guinea. Like, these women existed through history. You don't understand. So the Nharas were influential Afro-European, Luso-African businesswomen and commercial intermediaries who monopolized trade along the West African coast, particularly in Guinea-Bissau from the 16th to 19th century. Biracials. In Angola, you have the Donas. In colonial Atlantic Africa, the Portuguese influenced history. The Donas, along with Nharas and Signares, are influential mixed-race mestizo or mulatto women. They bridge European and African worlds, often operating as powerful traders, landowners, and cultural mediators. In the Gambia, you had the Señoras. Señoras means woman, ladies, or misses. If you're referring to the historical term, Señoras used in the Gambia during the colonial era, it refers to wealthy, influential, multiracial coastal women similar to the Signare in Senegal. Why do you think we have a lot of light-skinned Igbos? You don't even know your own history. During slavery, that is the reason why there's so many mixed race Igbos. That's why Osu system became a thing. They always, white men will come impregnate a bunch of black women. They'll pick them. Those black women will in turn be their face and everything. They will rule in their name. The same thing happening in the black community today. White men will pick black women and they will let them rule in their name. They will destroy black men for them. They will do everything they need them to do. And then eventually they turn them in, the women, after they ruled, they finish with the black ones. After a while, after a while, it moved on to biracial. By then, they'd created so many biracial women. And the biracial men existed, but they had no power because they wouldn't give men power. It was the women. So my issue with biracials, just like Eric Brian Stone, every day he's on the internet talk about the black woman. I love the black woman. The black man is pathetic. The black man can't afford shit for the black woman. What did he do? He went to go get him a biracial. That's why. So for me, biracial woman, 8 times out of 10 will pick a white man. That's what they exist to destroy our society because of the system. I don't give a shit about how you feel. There's a system in place, and when you're born in the middle, all confused, you have this weird allegiance to the white side, and you will do anything for the white side. You will destroy the black side for the white side. You will infiltrate. Majority biracials will never identify as black. The only reason they do is because I uploaded a video. Let me show. We have a biracial woman left a whole comment as to why she identifies as biracial, as black, not white. I paused it. Go ahead. I said I paused it. I moved up. Pause it and read it. You come to find out almost every biracial, the reason they don't acknowledge that they are black, white, and choose black is because, again, whites would not accept us. So their mindset is, if the whites will not accept us, blacks, you fucking dirty Negroes, you must accept us, you fucking Negroes. How dare you not accept us? The whites kicked us out.
Guiné-Bissau, histórias semelhantes às das Signares também ocorreram, mas com nomes diferentes. As mulheres influentes na sociedade guineense eram conhecidas como Nhara, assim como as Signares em outras partes da África Ocidental. As Nhara foram comerciantes e empresárias que desempenharam um papel fundamental no comércio e na economia local durante os séculos XVIII e XIX. Essas mulheres ganharam poder e influência através do comércio de produtos como marfim, ouro, alimentos e escravos. Elas eram em grande parte descendentes de casamentos entre europeus e africanos e muitas vezes ocupavam uma posição única na sociedade, com acesso tanto às comunidades africanas quanto às elites coloniais. Assim como as Signares, as Nhara eram conhecidas pela sua capacidade de negociação e pelas suas habilidades comerciais. Elas mantinham relações estreitas com os colonizadores europeus e frequentemente atuavam como intermediárias entre esses colonizadores e as comunidades locais africanas. Embora as Nharas tenham desempenhado um papel importante no desenvolvimento económico da atual Guiné-Bissau, é importante reconhecer que muitas delas também estavam envolvidas no comércio de escravos, o que causou grande sofrimento a muitas pessoas na região. Portanto, enquanto as Nharas são lembradas como figuras históricas influentes na Guiné-Bissau, a sua história também é um lembrete das complexidades e injustiças do comércio transatlântico de escravos e do colonialismo na região.
Dona Ana Joaquina dos Santos e Silva, a maior traficante de pessoas escravizadas em Angola no século XIX. Naquela época, em Luanda, ela era conhecida popularmente por Dona Ana Mulata. Ela era tão rica e tinha tanto poder que ela própria emprestava dinheiro ao Estado ou ao governo colonial português para financiar obras públicas. Ana Joaquina dos Santos e Silva foi uma comerciante e traficante de pessoas escravizadas. Ela nasceu em Luanda no início do século XIX, filha de um português e de uma mulher mestiça angolana. Pouco se sabe sobre a sua infância. A maioria das informações que existem dela são da fase adulta. Ela casou-se com um homem português que era comerciante e traficante de escravizados. Quando esse marido morreu, ela herdou todo o negócio do marido. Mais tarde, casou-se novamente com outro homem português, também traficante. E após a morte desse segundo marido, ela herdou novamente os negócios. E a partir dali, ela tornou-se dona de um império e criou uma fortuna muito grande. Em 1836, o governo português aprovou uma lei para abolir a escravatura. Mas essa lei em Angola não teve muitos efeitos. Os comerciantes resistiam em manter os seus negócios, principalmente à base da corrupção. Em 1850, o Brasil aprovou uma lei que abrandou um pouco o negócio da escravatura. Sendo Angola o seu principal exportador, os negócios de Ana Joaquina sentiram os efeitos da nova lei brasileira. Dona Ana Joaquina chegou a ser dona de milhares de pessoas escravizadas. Além de exportar para o Brasil, essas pessoas trabalhavam nas suas propriedades agrícolas e também trabalhavam em sua casa fazendo trabalhos domésticos. Entre as suas propriedades estavam uma plantação de açúcar em Icolo e Bengo, próximo ao rio Bengo, em Angola, um palácio de 3 andares no bairro do Bungo, no centro de Luanda, uma plantação no Glungo Alto e algumas fazendas em Moçambique, no sul de Angola. Ela também foi dona de vários navios que faziam a travessia entre Angola e o Brasil, entre o porto de Luanda e os portos brasileiros da Bahia, Recife e Rio de Janeiro. Além disso, os seus navios viajavam também para Lisboa e para Montevideo, no Uruguai. Depois do início do declínio do negócio da escravatura, ela começou a diversificar os seus negócios. Ela passou também a emprestar dinheiro a outros comerciantes em Angola, inclusive também emprestava ao governo colonial português estabelecido em Angola. Em 1859, Ana Joaquina adoece e viaja para Lisboa em busca de tratamento. Algumas fontes dizem que ela faleceu durante a viagem de navio e o seu corpo foi atirado ao mar. Outras fontes dizem que ela morreu já em Lisboa. O seu antigo palácio na Baixa de Luanda hoje é propriedade do Estado angolano. O edifício esteve ao abandono durante muitos anos, mais tarde foi reabilitado e hoje funciona lá o Tribunal Provincial de Luanda. O que, na minha opinião, não faz qualquer sentido homenagear uma mulher que ficou extremamente rica com a venda de pessoas no nosso país. O seu nome aparece escrito na fachada do edifício como se tratasse de alguém que deu a vida pela nação. Depois da independência, nós retiramos as estátuas dos antigos colonizadores portugueses, mudamos os nomes de algumas ruas, mas fazemos homenagem a uma mulher que escravizava os filhos da terra.
Assalamualaikum tout le monde. Tey dañuy wax ci Signares mooy ñi ngeen di gis ñuy solo nii ay xale métis lañ. Pour plus d'informations ñëw leen ngeen visiter Maison des Esclaves, comme ça dinaa leen gën a leeralal fan la tur boobu noonu jugee. Donc Signares Gorée la amoon ak Saint-Louis. Maison des Esclaves bi ngeen di gis nag benn Signare bu ñuy wax Anne Pépin moom moo ko moom. Donc Anne Pépin moom moo nekk nii, moom moo doon dund en concubinage ak chevalier de Boufflers. Donc xale dañ may seetaan loolu moo tax duma mën a wax lan mooy concubinage. Donc Signare a ngi noonu, yaayu Signare moo nekk nii, su ma doxee tuuti daal di jot papay Signare. Donc j'espère que vidéo bi amal na leen njëriñ. Merci beaucoup. C'était Miss Gorée de passage. Bye.
Somewhere in coastal Senegal, there were Senegalese women known as the temporary wives of European men. The Signares represented a class of wealthy and influential Black and mulatto women in the 18th and 19th century that wedded French and Portuguese merchants and officers during the transatlantic slave trade. The arranged marriages usually lasted the length of the men's stay and brought a lot of these women to social elite status.
They were known for their beauty and flamboyance and access to different forms of wealth
in real estate, textiles, gold, and slaves, meaning their families could also evolve into this new form of aristocracy, and some of their descendants even still have significant financial advantage over the average Senegalese. The women served as mediators in trade and helped interpret the local language and culture. Now, as the wives, mixed daughters, and descendants of Europeans, their hierarchy was associated with proximity to whiteness. So the narrative of their legacy jumps between colonial complicity and female empowerment.
Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Ruben, and on today's video we are going to be talking about a clique of women from the Senegambian coast who had an interesting relationship with the European slave traders. Please subscribe if you've not, and invite someone to also subscribe so that together we can be a part of this intriguing journey. Please, let's get to the video. Signares, the female slave traders of Senegal. The stories and horrors of slavery have always been depicted on the cotton and cane plantations of the Americas, with white slave owners building wealth from human capital. While these stories are credible, they often ignore the powerful cult of 18th and 19th century West African women who had their hands in the rotten pie of slavery, built wealth and untouchable societies on the Senegambian coast. Here is the story of the Signares. The name Signar comes from the Portuguese word Señora, which means married. For hundreds of years, French slave ships careened through the Senegal River and casted their ugly shadows over the land, capturing the natives as slaves and selling them off in faraway lands. As these European merchants and traders spent many months and even years away from their home countries, they began settling among the Senegalese people, especially in the islands of Gorée and Saint Louis. With time, these European merchants started having romantic relationships with the Senegalese women, breeding a mixed-race population known as mulattoes. Women in these kinds of contractual or temporary marriages became known as Signares, and they lived in the upper echelons of the Senegalese society. These mixed-race children of French and Senegalese background took these relationships with the Europeans to new heights or depths. Because of their lighter skin color, they were treated better than the dark-skinned Africans, and they married only wealthy European slave traders or merchants. Through these marriages, their temporary husbands bought them lands and houses, and they became the sole middlemen for the goods brought by the Europeans. On realizing how profitable the slave trade was, the Signares began using their power and wealth to sponsor slave raids and gold panning upriver, and eventually they built slave dungeons called Maisons des Esclaves and became the key suppliers of slaves, gold, and ivory to the European traders. The Signares built powerful circles of their kind and ruled Gorée and Saint Louis, and their wealth and influence protected them. When a Signare married and the husband had to go away but promised to return, they performed an interesting ritual. They followed the man to his boat, collect his last footprint into a handkerchief, and hang it by their bedside and wait without remarrying until the husband.
There's actually crazy overlap between the Signares of Senegal and the plaçage system in New Orleans. For one, both systems originated under French occupation. The French started it in New Orleans due to a shortage of European women. And while French law didn't allow interracial marriages, it did indirectly allow common law relationships with freed Black women. So wealthy white men would enter into these partnerships with freed women that would essentially act as long-term companions with the promise of financial security, housing. And like these Signares, their social status was again uplifted by proximity to white men. Similar patterns happened in West and Central Africa with different colonizers, and sometimes for more economic reasons. For example, a good amount of the Signares from Senegal, the Nharas from Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau, and the Donas from Angola were not only companions but also participated and facilitated in trade deals in the slave trade. Then these marriages would establish their descendants into a new class of property-owning Afro-Europeans.
Creole culture is a vibrant tapestry woven from European, African, and Native American threads, initially referring to people of mixed European and African descent born in the New World. In Louisiana, Creole has evolved to encompass a unique blend of languages, cuisines, and music, reflecting the diverse heritage of its people. Louisiana Creole, a French-based language, showcases this mix, containing elements from French, Spanish, African, and Native American roots. The cuisine, such as the famous red beans and rice, combines local ingredients with cooking techniques inherited from African, French, and Spanish traditions, highlighting the blend of cultures. Moreover, Creole music is a testament to the community's rich cultural heritage, blending French, African rhythms, and later, English lyrics, creating a genre deeply rooted in the Creole experience. This cultural fusion is a testament to the resilience and adaptability of the Creole people, who have maintained their distinct identity through centuries of change.
Them teachers didn't want us to speak French. Whenever they would catch somebody speaking in French at school, that they would go and whip them.
We were caught speaking just one word of French, for that matter, on the school ground, anywhere on the school property. We were reprimanded, generally whipped, paddled, given lines to write. I must not speak French.
The speaking of French dropped off except among the Houma Indians. In their swamp hideaway at the mouth of the Atchafalaya, they clung to their shrimping grounds and to the language that had given them status for almost 2 centuries.
Le français qu'on se parle, c'est différent de France, c'est du français de l'autre bord. C'est les Français parlent pas pareil comme ici. Ça dure à se comprendre eux-mêmes. Les autres Français, ils comprennent mieux les autres que s'ils comprennent eux-mêmes.
Once you've taken the Cajun language, you've taken the Cajun culture away from me, away from my grandchildren, then who are they? They're an American plastic card with a number on it.
New Orleans' 6th and 7th wards were a traditional Creole neighborhood, but today the younger generation has moved away, and the racial and ethnic character of the community has changed. Older religious traditions and memories of earlier life there still linger, along with firm beliefs regarding Creole identity.
To me, a Creole is someone who's racially mixed and who lives here in New Orleans or South Louisiana, whose family has been here a very long time, whose family was probably of, who's a descendant of either a French or a Spanish family. And I think my personal definition stresses the fact of someone being racially mixed. The textbook definition, theoretically, is someone or something native to the New World. Emotionally, my definition doesn't square with the textbook definitions.
The main issue in the Creole controversy today is the question of race. There are whites who call themselves Creoles, there are blacks who call themselves Creoles, and there are mixed-race Creoles. In many cases, those of one group refuse to recognize the others, or are simply unaware of their existence.
When I was growing up, the only definition that we had, the only definition that we used, the only way we used the word was to describe someone who was racially mixed. And if someone would have told me, 20 years ago, that there was such a thing as a white Creole or a black Creole, I would have said, oh, you're kidding, there is no such thing as a black or a white Creole. Creoles are only racially mixed people. And again, that has nothing to do with the textbook definition of the term. That's the way we use it. And I think if you talk to people right now and ask them what a Creole is, people from New Orleans, that's the definition that they will.
Creole signified native in early Louisiana, then descendants of those natives who choose to call themselves Creole have valid claim to do so, whether descended from Europeans, from Africans, or both.
I've been doing genealogy and working on my family tree since, I guess, 1973. I have been able to trace my family back to the 1700s. I know the name of the plantation owner from whom I'm a descendant. I know where he was born in France. I know who his parents were and his grandparents because I wrote letters to the French archives and I got that information back. I know the name of the slave woman with whom he had children. I know what tribe she belonged to in Africa. And I think that's very rare. I have her manumission papers. She was given her freedom in Iberville Parish on July 14th, 1802. And I always thought that was an interesting date because that's also the day of the storming of the Bastille, so the beginning of the French Revolution. So I was able to find out all of that information.
The children of that French planter and African woman would have been called Creoles simply by virtue of their native Louisiana birth. Again, history provides a framework for understanding how that meaning changed in the next 100 years.
Creole for me, in New Orleans that is someone of French and Spanish descent. Because of the early colonists, the French were here first and then the Spanish. There are certainly different definitions of Creole, but I think in New Orleans it's definitely someone of French and Spanish descent.
Again, not everyone would agree, including people throughout South Louisiana who speak the Creole dialect that developed in colonial times, through constant daily contact between those who spoke African languages and those who spoke French.
One of the ways that I arrived at a definition of Creole was from the neighborhood in which I grew up and my personal experiences. Before I read anybody's definition, I was growing up in a neighborhood where there were people who were identified by themselves and by other people in the community as Creoles. And I arrived at what a Creole was by what I saw about me. I was not growing up in the 7th Ward. I was growing up in a neighborhood that's called Uptown New Orleans, and that had a lot of people who had migrated from small towns, some in Louisiana, some in Mississippi, and there was a grocery store on one of the corners that was operated by a succession of people who called themselves Creoles. These people were white. I heard Creole spoken in the grocery store daily, in conversations between whites and blacks who also called themselves Creoles, my mother included. So I immediately decided that Creole was not necessarily black only, was not necessarily white only. One of the things that the people seemed to have in common was that their families had been in Louisiana somewhere a long time. And another thing was that they tended to be Catholic.
Today, many descendants of those white families have dropped the Creole label, especially outside New Orleans, where Creole now mainly refers to French-speaking blacks. And within the black community, there is disagreement as to whether skin color, status, and class background have any place in Creole identity or in contemporary black identity.
Difficult to break down, but nevertheless we shall do it. My brother here asked, hey, what is the difference in between somebody who is Louisiana Creole versus somebody who's just a multi-generational light-skinned person, somebody who's been light-skinned since a great-great-grandpappy stayed in South Carolina some goddamn where. So, to be fair, if you're going just by historically accurate, Creole didn't always mean that you were black and French or black and mixed with native. Creole sometimes there are a lot of white people who claim Creole, who are Creoles. A lot of times you would say Creole just to mean that you were somebody staying in a French colony outside of those who were born in France. As you get later down the line, then you start seeing Creole kind of be more attached to blacks who happen to live in French-speaking colonies, and maybe the Cajun thing would do, right? But so the difference is when you're Creole, all that simply means basically for the most part is that your ancestors to a certain degree came from one of the former French-speaking colonies in the United States. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to be Louisiana. A lot of people do not know when you go to Mississippi, there were Mississippi Creoles, which I'm going to make a video talking about a little bit later. There were even Mobile Creoles, and they've pretty much all died out for the most part. Even Missouri. Pretty much anywhere there was French-speaking people there. Now, when you get to the skin color aspect of being Creole, the reason why a lot of people attach you being light-skinned to Creole is because just from my personal experience, and you're talking to somebody whose father's side, my grandmama and them, they was Creole. They spoke Kourivini, French, all that shit. The overwhelming majority of people who are Creole, they're either light-skinned or they have a certain look. They're either light-skinned or have a certain look. And a lot of that comes from because in a lot of these French-speaking colonies, there was quite a lot more mixing versus other places. It is what it is. So that's why you attach the light-skinned thing to it. Like most people that I know that are Creole, they are light-skinned. I'm just going to be honest with you. Like me, I just always like to say I'm African-American, I'm black, because for me, I feel like whenever I see somebody who's my skin tone, who goes a hard line on saying a Creole, I look at that as somebody who's just trying to say anything else outside of black. So I just want y'all to be like, hey, I'm black, man. I'm proud of it. Like, but But on my father's side, yeah, for sure, we Kurivini spoke Kurivini. They were from Point Kupi, and they spoke that for sure, Kurivini out there. For those not, Kurivini is essentially French Creole. Comment ça va? Comment toi? So yeah, I hope I explained.
Saint-Louis du Sénégal, ville d'eau et de mémoire, ville où l'histoire s'est écrite au féminin. Elle s'appelait Les Signares, femme d'influence, femme de parole, femme de diplomatie. À l'époque des colonisations, ce sont elles qui accueillaient les autorités. Elles faisaient le lien entre les mondes, entre les cultures, entre les intérêts. Elles maîtrisaient les codes, les langues et l'art de recevoir. Aujourd'hui, leur héritage demeure. Ils traversent le temps. Ils habitent encore les rues de Saint-Louis.
No, there's a city that actually is credited with it in Senegal. It's called St. Louis. And it is a sister city of the St. Louis here in Missouri.
Yeah, St. Louis. When I was in Senegal, I remember talking to people, and somebody sent me a message. They're like, "Oh, I'm in St. Louis." They sent St. Louis, but I was thinking, why the hell? Why are you in St. Louis?
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until after the fact that I realized, St. Louis is actually
because the French colonized both countries or both places, because
several places in Africa. A lot of West Africa is francophone.
Because colonization.
Yeah,
we'll talk about that later.
It may come as a shock to most St. Louisans that French culture in St. Louis is heavily reflected in our street names, the fleur-de-lis in our flags, and having the second biggest Mardi Gras celebration in America, and the city being named after the King of France. St. Louis was actually founded in Spain. That's right, St. Louis was founded in the European country of Spain. Well, technically. It's debatable. Take a look into the interesting start of our great city. Back in the day, way back, 1700s, before the US was even a country. You had the three big players in the colonization game, that being Great Britain, Spain, and France. The soon-to-be location of St. Louis being right around here where it says France. And one thing to mention, these guys love fighting each other. In 1762, the King of France and the King of Spain, they got together, and France said, "Hey Spain, I'm really sorry I dragged you into all these wars. As a token of my appreciation, I'm going to give you all this land," which was known as Louisiana. "But Spain, you've got to promise to keep it on the down low and don't tell anyone." Not yet. So they drafted up an agreement called the Treaty of Fontainebleau, and boom, just like that, all this French land became Spanish land. And nobody knew about it, except for the kings. Very strange. The three countries were already in the middle of a war called the 7 Years' War, which ended the next year in 1763. Well, France and Spain lost, and Great Britain won. And when they signed the Treaty of Paris, Great Britain got all this land east of the Mississippi, which they thought they were taking from France, but really we know they took it from Spain. This caused a mass exodus of French colonists that moved to the other side of the Mississippi to what they thought was still France, because they thought the British wouldn't treat them well. Enter in Pierre Leclerc and his 13-year-old stepson Auguste Chouteau, who traveled up the Mississippi River from New Orleans to establish their fur trading monopoly, which they got permission from the French government to do. They arrived here at Leclerc's landing downtown and started building the city of St. Louis. But pay attention to these dates. The city was founded on February 15th, 1764. 2 months later, on April 21st, 1764, France finally spilled the beans. They said, "Hey everybody, guess what? You've actually been in Spain for the last 2 years. Good luck. France out." Yeah, that didn't sit well with the people. When they actually sent Spanish governors to administer the lands, there was a rebellion and they kicked them out for a while. But Spain eventually came out on top. You see, the biggest distinction on whether St. Louis was a French or a Spanish city really comes down to who was governing the land. St. Louis was technically founded by Frenchmen who thought they were in France, on lands that were governed by the French government, but it was technically owned by Spain. It wasn't until a little bit after the founding of St. Louis that Spain actually owned the land and governed the land. But some of you were probably like, wait, didn't we buy the Louisiana Purchase from France? And yes, Spain eventually did trade back the Louisiana territory to France in exchange for modern-day Tuscany. And St. Louis became French again for a total of 3 years, but it was still administered by Spain. And that short guy in France, Napoleon, really liked starting wars, but he needed some more money for it. So he sold the Louisiana territory to the USA. This transfer of land to the USA was celebrated in St. Louis as Three Flags Day. This is where they lowered the Spanish flag, then raised the French flag, and then lowered that flag and raised the American flag. And what a crazy history of the city. It can really be debated either way which country controlled St. Louis and what country it was founded in. Let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to follow, because most of you aren't. And check back into my page for more St. Louis content.
Now looking back, I know and I appreciate now that when you grow up in a colonial system, or in whichever system you grow up, people who design that system design in such a way that they will produce a certain kind of people, because they give them a certain kind of information, they expose them to a certain kind of information, and they keep certain kind of information away from them. So you grow up with a certain attitude. You are shaped. Your mind, your attitude, your values are shaped. Your world is shaped. And you are deliberately discouraged to appreciate anything about you, because you are not supposed to know or to imagine there was anything good in your pre-British experience. So your people in the pre-British era were primitive, they were backward, they didn't know anything, they did not even know anything about God. Now you know about God, you know about Jesus, you're saying the rosary. Remember, I was saying the rosary. All these things are packaged in such a way that you look at the British and you admire them greatly.